Welcome back. It was a crime which pushed everything else off the front pages. 3 men, all known criminals, found shot dead in the Essex countryside. It was a cold-blooded, professional killing. The victims had many enemies, but which one wanted them executed?
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Neighbours of victim Tony Tucker were baffled at how he could afford a £250,000 home and a string of flash motors with no visible means of support. They suspected he was a shady character, but had no idea that he had amassed a fortune from his years at the heart of the Essex underworld. His murder stunned residents in the village of Fobbing, where the gangster owned a hacienda-style bungalow with breathtaking views across open farmland. Tucker's palatial red brick home boasts its own stables. In the front garden is a statue of a naked goddess, and Greek urns adorn the front wall. Tucker had a separate garage block for the luxury motors which were often spotted in his drive. These included at least one Mercedes. Neighbours said the drug baron had only recently moved into the house. Tucker appeared paranoid about security. He had an elaborate wall built and iron gates installed to block access to the front of the property. A sophisticated video intercom system was also fitted to vet callers, and after dark, guard dogs patrolled the ground. The detective leading the murder hunt said that Tucker had good reason to fear for his safety. Chief Superintendent Ivan Dibley said of the 3 victims, "These men had been involved with a sort of criminality where it is likely that their lives have been threatened before." Post-mortem examinations were being carried out on the bodies yesterday at Broomfield Hospital, Chelmsford. Mr. Dibley appealed for more information from the public. He said, quote, "I'd particularly like to hear from anyone who saw a vehicle leaving the farm track at White House Farm, or anybody who saw someone thumbing a lift on the A130, which runs past the farm at the relevant time." Mr. Dibley confirmed that the 3 men arrested on Thursday on suspicion of being connected with the shootings had been released without charge. As Tony Tucker's reputation as a hard man grew, so did his wealth, and the former soldier just couldn't resist showing it off. Local workers who laid carpets at his £250,000 Fobbing home recalled seeing rolls of notes lining the mantelpiece. The sum must have run into thousands. But Tucker didn't have to worry about leaving money lying around. He knew no one would dare steal it. One Sunday morning at his former house in Chafford Hundred, neighbours were disturbed by the boom 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 of loud music. Inside, a professional DJ had been hired to spin records as Tucker lounged in bed with common-law wife Anna Whitehead. He had started to live like a mafia don. Parked outside the Diamond Lode property was his new jet-black top-of-the-range Porsche with the number plate TT9. A year later, in autumn 1995, Tucker had enough money to buy the Fobbing house, but he would only live in it for 2 months. It was called Brymount Lodge and came complete with a sophisticated video intercom to vet callers and guard dogs which patrolled after dark. Tucker ran a lucrative security agency which allowed him to pocket a share of the profits from drugs sold at clubs where he ran the door. He was responsible for the infamous Raquel's nightclub in Basildon when the ecstasy tablet that killed teenager Leah Betts was bought there. As the money rolled in, he started injecting a cocktail of steroids and cocaine, and his regime of terror began. A former associate revealed Tucker kept horses stabled near Basildon. He discovered the owner of the stables was in debt and made discreet inquiries to find out who was owed money. Armed with this information, Tucker sent a group of heavies into the riding school bar. It was smashed to pieces with iron rods. The next day, Tucker went to the owner and said he had heard there was trouble and knew who was behind it. He told him if he could stable his horses for free, he would ensure that there was no more violence. A Stanford plumber also had good reason to remember Tucker. He and his son fitted a shower at his new Fobbing home. Later, they had a call from Tucker saying it needed fixing. The plumber told him it must be a faulty part and he would contact the manufacturers. Tucker's reply was simple: You obviously don't know who I am, you better get round here now. Firstly, let's start with a statement from a waitress at TGI Fridays. The following statement is from Linda Wolfe, dated the 11th of December 1995. I've worked as a waitress at TGI Fridays restaurant situated at Lakeside Shopping Centre complex in West Thurrock since April this year. My work entails the taking of orders and serving of food and drink to customers who attend the restaurant. TGI's is an American-themed burger and steak restaurant and also has a large bar centred within the premises. There are a large number of staff members and we all know each other as we spend so much time working at the restaurant. On Wednesday, the 6th of December 1995, I started a day shift at work and arrived at 10 a.m. I would normally work until 6 p.m. It is normally fairly quiet during the day and only starts to get busy in the evening. On this day, I had 5 tables to cover. I cannot be precise with the time, but around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, 4 men were seated at one of my allocated tables, table number 50. I can't remember who brought them to my table, but someone would be responsible for seeing them at the entrance door and seating them to a table of suitable choice. As soon as they sat down, Helen Smith, another staff member, approached the men and asked them if they wanted a drink. The man ordered 3 bottles of Beck's beer and a Diet Pepsi. I went over to the table and made sure the drinks had been ordered, and then went over to enter the drinks onto the till as we keep a computer record of the order. I will describe the men as follows. One of them, whom later introduced himself to me as Tony Tucker, he was white, mid-30s, he was very tall and had a stocky build. He had collar-length hair that was brown, long at the sides and short at the front. He was wearing a black bomber jacket and had a mobile phone, but I couldn't tell you what make. The next man, whom I shall refer to as Pat, was white, mid to late 30s, he was slightly taller than Tony and had a very large build. He had short hair that was greying but was brown in colour. He was wearing a long curved gold necklace outside his top. I can't remember his clothing, but he also had a mobile phone. The third man, whom I shall refer to as the younger one, was white, 26 to 28 years old. He was tall but not as large as the others, but he had a very well built physique. He had dark, possibly black hair that was very short in a French crop style. I remember he was wearing a very nice V-neck jumper, green and orange in colour. It stuck out as it was very nice. The fourth male I shall refer to as the quiet one, as he didn't say much and seemed very moody. He was also white. He appeared older than the others, perhaps late 30s, early 40s. He had a similar large build. He was very well built. He had wavy grey coloured hair, but I can't be sure as to the length, and stubble on his face. He was wearing a bright yellow coloured nylon bomber jacket that was zip-up. The young ones said they were all hungry and they wanted to order straight away. Tony ordered a fajita baguette. Pat ordered mushroom steak, mushroom with a baked potato. The young one ordered pasta Santa Fe with garlic bread, and the fourth male in the yellow ordered fajita baguette as well. Apart from the fourth male in the yellow jacket, the other 3 were mucking around, generally taking the piss. They kept asking me to let my hair down, and eventually after their constant pestering I did so. Tony said words to the effect of, "Oh yeah, nice, you've got to come to Berwick Manor on Friday, ask for Tony Tucker. Tony Tucker. It's easy, it rolls off the tongue." I said I might, but to be honest I had to work on Friday and needed the money. I mentioned to Tony that I knew a bloke that worked at Hollywood's nightclub in Romford, and Tony used his mobile to ring and try and find out who, but his phone wouldn't work, so he used Pat's. He finally got through and asked if they had a bouncer called Boise. Someone must have given a name of who this was, as Tony said, "What, Mick?" He laughed and said, "Sack him." He then laughed and said, "Only joking." At the end of their meal, Pat said to me, "Get Claire to ring me." I believe that Pat was asking if Claire could serve them. Claire Carey was who he meant, but she was not working that day. I said, "Has she got your number?" He said sharply, "Course she has." The bill came to around £56. Tony put down 70 quid cash, and Pat also put down a tenner. The fourth man just sat there and remained quiet throughout the meal, but he definitely seemed moody, although the other 3 were not ignoring him and didn't appear upset with him. All 4 left approximately an hour later. This left me with around £25 in tips, which I was really pleased about. I didn't see what car they went to, and this was the last time I saw them. However, I have subsequently been reading the national newspapers, and have seen Tony, Pat's and the young one's pictures in the paper as being shot and killed. They were definitely the same three who I served that day. I have not seen the fourth man in the papers, but I believe I would recognise him again. Interestingly enough, in this statement from the waitress, she mentions there at some point in time that Tony Tucker's mobile phone wasn't working, so he asked to borrow Pat's. You'll understand why that becomes important a little bit later on in this video. But from here, many people have the false impression that they received a phone call at Timberlog Lane, and that's to meet up later that evening. But that's not correct. There's actually another place they go to after TGI Fridays. I believe that Peter Cuthbert goes his separate way, and Tucker, Tate and Rolfe head to a carpet shop on Timberlog Lane. The following statement is from Mark Harding, dated the 9th of December 1995. I'm employed at LT Carpets Limited at their site at 198 Timberlog Lane, Basildon. From there, the company sells carpets to the public. I've worked at LT Carpets for around 12 years. I've seen people that are now known as Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe on a few occasions. On the 29th of the 11th, 95, the three of them all came in together. They had a look around and then Tony Tucker made an order to recarpet a flat at 108 Mill Green, Basildon. It had already been measured and he wanted it fitted by the weekend. The total was £800. Tony paid a £100 deposit, leaving a balance of £700. The carpet was fitted on Friday the 1st of the 12th 95 by Steve Carter, who works out of our Dagenham shop. I asked him to pick up the balance of the money because I didn't want to have to try and chase up these people for the money. I haven't had any problems with any of them, but you hear stories about them and they're all big people that you wouldn't like to argue with. After Steve had fitted the carpet, he came away without getting the money. So I had to phone up Tony Tucker to get the balance. He had given me his telephone number as 0385 317 327. I phoned him 3 times. I got through to him twice on that number. The other time the call was diverted and I left a message for him. When I spoke to Tony, he was apologetic and promised to get me the money. It's around 1:30 p.m. to 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 6th of the 12th 1995, the same 3 people, Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, came into the yard. They came in a blue Range Rover. They all got out, just walking about, whilst Tony came into the office and paid the £700 balance by cheque. After finishing the paperwork, they then left. Tony didn't really say anything, only sorry for messing us about. The invoice has been sent over to our main office in Peacock Road, Basildon. The cheque was banked with our day's takings that evening. I'm not certain which bank they use. It's after leaving the carpet shop that this story starts to take a bit of a more bizarre twist. Now, I covered this very recently, but for the purposes of this video, it's important for me to go over it again. Tony Tucker on his mobile receives a telephone call at 14:29 from the payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn in Ipswich. Now, this is widely believed to be the call that was summoning them to a meeting later that evening, which led to their murders. Now, what I find interesting about these calls is that we've always been told that it wasn't actually Tony Tucker who was the prime target. He wasn't the prime motivation behind this triple murder. Now, what is also interesting about these telephone calls is that we're not just looking at one here. We have the original phone call from the payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn to Tucker's mobile. Then he appears to head to the payphone on Timberlog Lane to call this number back at 14:32. Just a few seconds later, the payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn is again calling Tucker's mobile. Now, in the book Blogs 19, which was co-written by Darren Nichols, it's claimed in there that this is Jack Womes making these telephone calls. Coincidentally, that the actual payphone at the Sorrel Horse Inn is incredibly close to where Jack Womes was working at the time. But did Jack Womes really know Tucker? Would he be calling Tony Tucker to arrange the meeting for later that evening? There's other people that believe that this was Steele trying to contact Tucker to arrange yet again the meet for later that night. Now, how you choose to interpret these telephone calls is down to you. If you believe this is completely innocent, this is simply Michael Steele, who couldn't get hold of Pat Tate at the time, ringing Tony Tucker and organising the meet for later that evening, that's absolutely fine. Or you may wish to have a more sinister view of these phone calls. We've heard in previous videos of a slight strain in the relationship between Tucker and Tate. And did this impact on Michael Steele's plans? Now, if this is actually Michael Steele making these calls, is he arranging something with Tucker here that Tate was unaware of. It's also wholeheartedly possible that this isn't even Steele at all, or Jack Womes making these telephone calls to Tony Tucker. Now, this is going to border on the edge of conspiracy theory, and I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. Because what I find strange when looking at the crime scene, looking at the way that Tony Tucker's body is positioned in that Range Rover, he looks incredibly relaxed, as if he hasn't had a shock, he's not surprised by anything. But ultimately, he is also dead along with the other two members in that car. So what could possibly explain that? Could it have been that Tucker actually knew what was going on that evening and his job was to get Tate down the lane along with Steele or someone else? Could it have been that he was expecting Tate to be shot, therefore his body position is that of a relaxed person? Or could it simply be that his body position is like that because that's the way it fell after being shot with the shotgun? Now, because this case is quite open-ended in a lot of places, it does allow, I believe, for a little bit of assumption and possibly imagination in certain areas. Now, hopefully this doesn't come across as me being a conspiracy theorist or trying to push out false narratives or false ideas, but we have to ask ourselves, why is it Tucker that is receiving these telephone calls? The whole basis for this case that was put forward by the prosecution was that Michael Steele was under threat from Tate. Michael Steele was receiving threats. Tate was causing Michael Steele a great deal of trouble regarding the dud cannabis deal. It was decided that Tate had to go. Tucker doesn't even figure in this case in terms of a motive for murder. It just happened to be that Tucker was close to Tate and Tucker also got killed along with him. So why are these calls, the calls that are supposedly to actually arrange the meetup for later that evening, why are those telephone calls going to Tucker's mobile? Now, playing devil's advocate again here for one moment, could it be that Steele and Tucker actually deemed Tate to be the weak link in the chain? We had Tucker, who was a businessman to some degree. He was able to sell the product. We had Steele, who was able to import it off his own back, quite an intelligent guy. And we have Tate sort of sitting in the middle here, kind of like the muscle. But interestingly, when we take a look at Donna Garwood's statement, who was Tucker's then girlfriend, her brother actually mentioned that Tucker had said to her that Tate had done something which he was worried reflected badly on himself. Tucker was concerned by Tate's actions. Could it have been that either Tucker approached Steele and said, look, what do we need Tate for? He's causing us all this trouble. We've just had the Leah Bet situation. He's being too loud. We can work together. We can split the profits. We'll make a lot more money without him. And could it have been that that's how Steele got all three of them down the lane? This is all bearing in mind if Steele was actually involved. And as I say, it could well be, and it more than likely is, that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were all completely unaware that night of what they were there for, and they were subsequently executed rapidly. It's also worth remembering that if this deal had any truth to it, if this deal was actually going to happen, this £1 million deal, that £1 million was worth a great deal of money, particularly back in 1995. Was Tucker the sort of greedy person who would have taken Steele up on such an offer to get rid of Tate and split the profit between them? Also, never underestimate the importance of the Leah Bet situation. Leah Betts, who died on November the 16th, 1995, and the press and the publicity that that then generated. The pressure, to some degree, was really coming down on Tucker during this time period. To end this video, I'm going to leave you with an eyewitness account of the last known sighting of Tony Tucker on December the 6th, 1995. The following is a short statement from Anna Marie Whitehead. The date, the 7th of December, 1995. The time, 1500 hours. I last saw Tony at 6 p.m. when he was picked up from my house by Craig Rolfe in the blue Range Rover. We were supposed to be going for a meal at the Global Caf, South Street, Romford last night, but he never returned. Tony was wearing jeans, Saatchi white vest, a fleecy North Sales jumper / sweatshirt, and Caterpillar boots. He was carrying a Nokia mobile phone, telephone number 0385 317 327. I later left a message on his answer machine at 8 p.m. He would have had his address book / diary with him. The following newspaper article is from the 29th of February 1996 with the headline, "Jealous drugs boss shot his own pal." Murdered drug baron Tony Tucker has been blamed for shooting his own friend Pat Tate and then supplying him with a gun and drugs while he was recovering in hospital. The fateful alleged shooting came a year before both men were slaughtered. Tucker, who was slain alongside Tate and Craig Rolfe on a deserted farm track in Rettendon last December, either carried out the 1994 shooting himself or arranged it and then planted the gun on one of Tate's other pals, it is claimed. A friend of Tate claims Tucker was jealous of Tate's friendship with the other man. The shooting paints a picture of Tucker as a jealous man, capable of doing anything to make sure he got his own way. The incident happened in 1994 as Pat Tate was at home preparing to go to Tucker's party in London. He was in his bathroom shaving when the glass was shattered by a bullet which hit him in the arm. Tate's friend, a woman who does not want to be identified for fear of reprisal, says Tucker stoked Tate's fear and paranoia after the shooting by giving him a gun to protect himself while he was in hospital. She also claims that Tucker supplied Tate with drugs while he was in his hospital bed. The gun which fired the bullet was then allegedly planted at the home of a friend of Tate's. The pal was allegedly questioned about the shooting, but no one was ever charged. Tate had not long been out of prison when the bathroom shooting occurred. He had been jailed in November 1990 for 6 years for robbery and drugs charges, but was let out in July 1994 on licence. When the pistol and drugs were found, Tate's licence was revoked and he was sent back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. He was finally released on October the 31st last year, weeks before he and the 2 other men were shot dead, their bodies discovered in a Range Rover. Police believe the Rettendon shooting was part of a drugs turf war. Tate's mother Marie confirmed that Tucker had supplied her son with drugs and the gun which was found under his hospital bed. She said, quote, "Pat could see no wrong in Tony, even when Pat was caught with the drugs and the gun. Tony said he would own up and take the blame to keep Pat out of prison, but he never did." The following newspaper article was from the 9th of the 9th, 1997, with the headline, "Forensic Scientist Describes How Trio Were Killed." 3 men killed in the Range Rover murders were each shot once from point-blank range before 5 other wounds were inflicted, probably with a pump-action shotgun that the Old Bailey heard yesterday. Forensic scientist John Burns concluded this occurred to prevent any escapes or attempts to hinder the shooting. Quote, "It appeared the incident happened extremely quickly. 1 shot was fired at each victim before further shots were fired." Most of the shots appear to have been fired at close range through the open rear offside door of the vehicle. Each of the men had received shotgun wounds to the head. There was much blood in the vehicle with splattering of blood and tissue on many of the surfaces, he added. Mr. Andrew Monday, prosecuting, told the court the incident occurred after a dispute in relation to drug dealing following a consignment of cannabis from Holland which had brought complaints all round. Michael Steele, 54 of St Mary's Road, Great Bentley, and Jack Womes, 35 of Main Road, Brockford, Suffolk, have pleaded not guilty to murdering all 3 men whose bodies were found on December 7th, 1995. Mr. Burns' estimate of the range was within 2 feet or so of a damaged headrest, and added it was consistent with the same shot having caused injury to the head or neck. Tate, slumped in the back seat, had a superficial wound caused to the back of the head, resulting in damage to the scalp, and there was a large shotgun entry wound behind the left ear. He also had an entry wound to the left side of the chest. Front seat passenger Tucker had an entry wound to the back of the head, about level of the ears, and 2 wounds to the side of the face. The driver Rolfe had an entry wound behind the top of the right ear and an entry wound at the side of the right neck. Now we're led to believe by not only the prosecution but in documentaries and films which are shown on TV that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe entered Workhouse Lane with an occupant in the rear of the Range Rover, a 4th passenger. The Range Rover itself travelled down the length of Workhouse Lane on December 6, 1995. When that Range Rover reaches the 5-bar locked gate, the rear occupant behind Craig Rolfe gets out of the vehicle in order to go and open this gate. During the time that the rear door is open, a gunman approaches from nearby bushes and executes Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. This crime was committed in a matter of seconds, minutes at most. Not one of the three deceased ever leave the Range Rover once it enters Workhouse Lane. So then how do we explain the presence of mud on the bottom of Tony Tucker's boots? Now, once we are faced with that following photograph of Tony Tucker's boots with mud on the bottom of them, the next question should be, do we have any transference from these boots into the inside of the Range Rover? If this was quite a fresh occurrence of Tucker being outside in the lane, you would imagine that mud would have been wet to have stuck to Tucker's boots. It would have then been transferred into the front footwell of the Range Rover. Now, interestingly, when we take a look at the next photograph of the front footwell where Tucker is situated, we do have a stain here in the front footwell. This matches up in both colour and texture to that of the mud which is found on the bottom of Tucker's boots. Now, the presence of mud on his boots and in the front footwell shouldn't be enough to immediately make you believe that Tucker got out of the vehicle at any point during his journey down the lane. This mud may have been picked up from the first part of the journey in the Range Rover before they'd even reached Workhouse Lane itself. Now, the next port of call is to actually look at the crime scene as a whole. We need to look for any item or any vehicle which may have travelled down the whole length of the farm track so that we can see if any drying mud is present so that we can compare it with the mud that has dried on Tucker's boots and in the front footwell of the Range Rover. Well, luckily enough, we have the Range Rover which has travelled the full length of the farm track, and on the side wall of the Range Rover we have drying mud. Now, if we compare this mud with the mud which is found on Tucker's boots and is found in the front footwell of the Range Rover, we have a very credible match. Now, some people watching this video may believe that mud is just mud. It could have come from anywhere. But that's not quite the case, because mud varies from location to location, especially in clay content. It can dry at a certain speed, dry at a certain colour. And what we have here between the sidewall of the Range Rover, the outside of the vehicle, and what is found on the inside, as in the footwell and the soles of Tucker's boots, in my opinion, is a very close match to that of the mud found down the lane. Now, what I'm going to do for you next is read to you a newspaper article from the Express, which is dated May 2018. And in this article, John Womes, and that's Jack Womes' brother, so Jack Womes being one of the convicted men in this case, his brother actually appears in this article and makes mention of the mud and the soil samples being collected from the crime scene itself. I will read this article to you in its entirety, and I will make sure that I point out the part that discusses the mud when we get to it. Essex Boys murderers in new bid for freedom amid claims evidence was not disclosed. Two men convicted of the Essex Boys murders have launched a new appeal after a shed full of undisclosed evidence was allegedly uncovered. Michael Steele, 75, and Jack Womes, 56, were jailed for life in January 1998 after being found guilty of the Rettendon Range Rover murders of Essex drug barons Patrick Tate, 37, Tony Tucker, 38, and Craig Rolfe, 26. Their bodies were found in a Range Rover parked in a remote farm track in Rettendon Essex on the morning of December 7, 1995. The slayings have been the subject of several British gangster feature films which have speculated about what actually happened. Womes from Brockford, Suffolk, and Steele of Great Bentley, Essex, were involved in drug deals with the murdered gangsters but have always denied killing them. The pair have launched a new bid for freedom with an application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission based on claims of non-disclosure of evidence before the trial. Police and Crown Prosecution Service non-disclosure of evidence is currently being looked at in an inquiry by MPs on the Justice Committee, after a series of rape prosecutions collapsed due to late disclosure of unused evidence that supported the defence's cases. Womes and Steele's prosecution was based around the word of Supergrass Darren Nichols, 49, another Essex Boys gang member who was placed into witness protection after claiming in court he was their getaway driver after the murders. It also centred on the phone records which placed Womes and Steele in the area and in contact with Tate in the run-up to the killings. Womes' brother John Womes, 56, from Suffolk, told the Sunday Express newly disclosed phone evidence formed part of the fresh action. He said, quote, At the trial, we wanted everything that was unused as evidence, but it turns out we were never given everything, and now we have got that. I'm 110% sure that the non-disclosure will take us to an immediate appeal. Mr. Womes said the new material could fill a shed or room of 10 metres by 8. He added, quote, "It includes everything, even soil samples from the scene and from boots and tyres. We are more than delighted. It is coming up to 23 years now, but I have said we will win, because I will fight to the death, and we are getting near the end." Solicitor David Wells of Wells Burkham, who is representing the pair, tweeted, "Jack Womes and Michael Steele, the so-called Essex Boys convicted of the Rettendon murders in 1998, have both today formally requested the CCRC to review their convictions based on significant non-disclosure." Now back to the article itself, it goes on to state the following. The CCRC has to accept the new application, but if no new evidence is contained, it could quickly be dismissed. The CCRC previously referred the case for appeal in 2004, but the court upheld the convictions. In the mid-2000s, the CCRC looked at another appeal, but did not refer the case to court. Then in 2015, another approach to the CCRC was rejected as a subsequent court bid to overturn that decision. Now, what I find most interesting about that article is John Womes talking about some of the unused evidence, some of the evidence he has which neither the public nor myself have ever seen. It's interesting he mentions the soil samples, not only the soil samples but samples taken from the boots and the tyres of that vehicle. Is he trying to tell us here that they did actually match? It showed that Tucker got outside the vehicle, therefore the official narrative of them simply driving down to the locked 5-bar gate and then being executed within seconds could simply not be true. Now, given the fact that the Range Rover has travelled the full length of Workhouse Lane and the mud that you see on that vehicle is most definitely from Workhouse Lane, the Range Rover is the biggest indicator that the mud that we see on Tony Tucker's boots may well have originated from Workhouse Lane. It is very similar in colour, in texture, and we know that that mud must have been wet on the bottom of Tucker's boots for it to have then transferred into the front footwell of that Range Rover. Now back to the point in hand, why would Tony Tucker have even got outside the vehicle? Does it even matter why he got out of the vehicle? Well, really, realistically, it doesn't matter why he was outside the vehicle. All we are looking for is evidence which casts doubt upon the official narrative used by the prosecution. And it's the same narrative which is being told in the films and recent documentaries. To be able to have any other credible reason or suspect in this case, you need to first be able to disprove the official narrative which convicted Michael Steele and Jack Womes. Now, what we can say for certain is that we have two eyewitness accounts, one from Rebecca Carr and one from the farmer's wife, Frances Theobald, that state a Range Rover matching that description along with a white vehicle pulling off of Main Road into White House Farm car park. These two vehicles don't stop in the car park, they simply do a big loop and then enter back onto the main road the way they had just come from. That is in the direction of where this small farm track is located. Did they overshoot the lane? Did Tucker then get out of the vehicle at the entrance to Workhouse Lane to make sure that they were in the right direction? Did Tucker simply get out of the Range Rover to take a phone call or have a piss in the bushes? It doesn't actually matter why he got out of the vehicle. All we are looking for is something which can cast reasonable doubt on the official narrative that these three individuals simply drove to the end of Workhouse Lane to the locked 5-bar gate and were executed within seconds. I believe if these soil samples come back as positive between the boots of Tucker and the tyres of the Range Rover, we have an answer. They were either there for a little bit longer or a lot longer than we were ever told, or there was another reason as to why Tucker exited the Range Rover. Now, there are a few things that I can be fairly certain of, and one of those is that Tucker didn't exit the Range Rover when it reached its final stationary position. What gives me that impression is when we look at the outside of Tucker's door, we do have a footprint here, but it's facing in the wrong direction. This was more than likely left by the gunman. We also have a large amount of snow and no other footprints visible. We must remember that Tucker would have needed to have walked in one of the tracks to have got that mud on the bottom of his shoes or boots in the first place. In my opinion, Tucker has more than likely got out of the lane at the start of Workhouse Lane or maybe on the first bend to make sure that he's in the right lane. If we also take a look at the side of Tucker's door when it reaches its final stationary position, we can see that it's quite a tight squeeze. There's a lot of vegetation. It wouldn't be very feasible for Tucker to have got out in that location and left no footprints. Another couple of things that I can be fairly certain about regarding Tony Tucker exiting the vehicle is that he wouldn't have spent a great deal of time outside of that Range Rover, and he certainly wouldn't have been chased by anyone. Now, the reason I have that opinion is because the bottom of his jeans remain largely clean. If he was being chased by anyone, or if he had covered a long distance on foot, you'd have expected to have seen that mud splash up from the boots to the bottom of those jeans. But as you can see here, those jeans remain largely clean. So to summarise, without actually seeing the soil sample results myself, I can't be 100% convinced that the mud found on Tucker's boots definitely originated from Workhouse Lane. But in my opinion, we certainly have a lot of factors here pointing towards that being a distinct possibility. Does it matter if Tucker even got out the vehicle at all? In my opinion, yes it does, because we have an official narrative put forward not only by Darren Nichols, but by the prosecution in this case, which claims that the Range Rover simply turned off of Main Road, it travelled the full length of Workhouse Lane with these 3 occupants inside, and then they were simply executed. If Tucker at some stage got out of that vehicle for however long, it would mean that the official narrative was incorrect. The mother of murdered Pat Tate has claimed that her son was no drugs baron and died trying to protect his friend targeted for a revenge killing. Pat, 37, of Gordon Road, Basildon, was one of the trio found shot dead in a Range Rover in Rettendon early on Thursday, December the 7th. They were believed to have been lured to their deaths by a rival gang. But his mother Marie, 56, said the 6'3", 18-stone heavyweight had only attended the risky undercover meeting to support his pal Tony Tucker. She is convinced Tony, 38, of High Road Fobbing, and the other victim Craig Rolfe, 26, of Calshot Avenue, Chafford 100, were taken out by drugs rivals in a revenge attack for the drugs death of Kevin Whitaker in November 1994. She is emphatic that her son was not involved in that. Chelmsford coroner Dr. Malcolm Weir recorded an open verdict into Kevin's death after his drugged body was found in a ditch in Dunton, but his parents always claimed he must have been murdered by being made to take an overdose. Kevin's father Bert said, quote, "We believe Rolfe and Tucker were involved, but nobody came forward to say how it happened. Tucker was definitely at the inquest and Craig Rolfe had a warrant served on him to attend. He said Rolfe denied at the inquest that he knew Kevin, but was shown phone bills proving that his number had been rung from Kevin's house. And he added, quote, "We heard there was a contract out on Rolfe and Tucker, but how and if they did this to Kevin, we don't know." The toxicologist told us he didn't know how it wasn't a murder verdict at the inquest because of the amount of lignocaine, one of the drugs involved. Kevin was anti-needles, he hated them. Somebody administered this, but we don't know how or why. Mrs. Tate alleged that Kevin was caught up in a deal with a Romford drugs gang involving £60,000 worth of cannabis, for which he would have been paid just £2,000. But she claimed Craig and Tony wanted to stop Kevin talking. She said they injected him with a substance nicknamed Special K, a paralysing drug used on horses. She said, quote, "This paralysed his body but not his brain. They followed it up with what they told him was a line of cocaine which completely finished him off. He was only used to smoking bits of cannabis." Mrs. Tate said Pat was in hospital at the time. Craig Rolfe and Tony Tucker told him about it and thought it was funny. But Pat was in hospital after an attempt on his own life by someone else. He was shot while out on parole from an earlier prison sentence, and he forfeited that freedom after a nurse found a gun under his bed and he was jailed again. He had only been out of prison 5 weeks when he was killed. Mrs. Tate said, "People keep saying that he was a drugs baron, but he wasn't. He was no angel, but he wasn't one of the people that goes round to nightclubs selling e-tablets. Pat was warned about going to that meeting in Rettendon, but he went to protect Tony. Because he was such a big man, he thought that nothing could happen to him. He and Tony idolised each other." A total of 40 officers are currently working on the case to find the triple murderer. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley, who is leading the inquiry, said, "We would be interested to hear from Mrs. Tate if she has information she feels would be of use to our inquiries." The following newspaper article was from the 1st of March 1996 with the headline, "Drug War Alert." An all-out gang war to settle control of the drug trade in South Essex was the grim prospect portrayed by police bosses for TV viewers at the weekend. The dire warning came on Sunday's London weekend television programme London Tonight, which showed violence among the drug barons of South Essex spiralling out of control. Essex police have now confirmed that the battle against the drug trade has become their top priority. According to police, more murder and mutilation in answer to the assassination of Basildon gangsters Pat Tate, Craig Rolfe and Tony Tucker at Rettendon last December is expected soon. Superintendent Ivan Dibley, who is leading the inquiry into the Rettendon shooting, said, "When 3 people of this calibre are murdered, there will be no shortage of people wanting to take their place. Violent reprisals from the friends of the deceased or from someone close to one of those murdered must be expected." Also screened was the horrific tale of drugs, torture and extortion surrounding recently jailed Jason Vella and his Basildon and Tilbury-based gang. An Essex police spokesman said, quote, "The arrest of drug traffickers is one of our key objectives. We are holding a major conference on March the 20th with other agencies, including educationalists and the probation service, to see how we can tackle the drugs problem." The following newspaper article was from the 7th of March 1996 with the headline, "The Hit." They have a new parlour game in the Essex village of Rettendon, and no one plays it better than Peter Theobald and his wife Frances. Murder Mystery is a game of mental gymnastics, its aim to formulate a theory, necessarily incredible, to weave the few known facts into a complete account of what happened 300 yards from their living room. The Theobalds from Farming Stock were at it again the other night over tea and walnut cake. He wondered why there was so little mess when he made his discovery on an icy winter's morning. She was struggling to explain how they could have driven to the remote spot behind their White House farm during the evening rush hour as police supposed, and why nobody had seen them as they waited for several minutes before completing the right turn in their Range Rover. Quote, "Perhaps they were already dead," she suggested, returning to one of her favourite themes. There were 3 bodies, victims of a shotgun assassin as they sat in the lane. Craig Rolfe, 26, was in the driver's seat. His boss, Tony Tucker, 38, friend to the stars, was in the front passenger seat, and in the back was Tucker's boyhood friend, Pat Tate. It was a fearsome crime, except many locals thought good riddance to drugs rubbish. They were drug dealers, but none was Mr. Big, even in Essex. They were speculating at the spanking new police station in South Woodham Ferrers. It has a lovely new incident room, and as the officers moved out after investigating the death of teenager Leah Betts, it seemed only right Ivan Dibley and his squad of 40 should move in. The station was officially opened 3 weeks after their murder inquiry got underway. The forum for a classic detective story. Some detectives believed the gunman was in the Range Rover with his victims. His 3-shot pump-action 12-bore shotgun, a little sawn off perhaps, picked up at the murder spot as he clambered out to open a gate. Others think he stepped out of the shadows after the Range Rover's occupants were lured to Workhouse Lane, regular home to courting couples. Others still favour a hybrid. The gunman was indeed waiting, but the man who ordered the murders had hired a professional hitman and arrived with the others in the back seat, a trusted colleague or friend. They died in under 2 seconds, and only one, Tate, seemed to know anything about it. How much, as almost everything in this case, is conjecture. A post-mortem examination highlighted a combination in his bloodstream of heroin, cocaine and cannabis. He was, after all, an 18-stone bodybuilder. A room darkened as he entered it, one associate was to remark. There were, in the first few weeks, an array of flowers left at the scene, mysteriously dropped by unseen hands in the dead of night. One paid tribute to the man on the back seat, who took 2 shots to his head and 1 in the stomach. "A wonderful man," it read. "Poison did this to you." Nearly 3 months on, there are no more flowers. Ivan Dibley, 50, one of 3 detective superintendents in Essex, was on a day off on December the 7th last year. He was breakfasting at home in Chelmsford when the call came just before 8:30 a.m. He reacted calmly, going off to the shops to do his early morning chores before taking over the investigation. He had headed more than 25 murder investigations in the previous 5 years. It rankled that 2 remained unsolved. But 1995 had been a good year. He had cleared up 10 murders in as many months. He had never headed a triple murder inquiry before. It dawned on him that this, his biggest case, was to be his last. He was retiring at the end of April after 32 years in the force. Only 30 minutes had elapsed since Ken Jiggins, 47, arrived at Peter Theobald's door, ready to help his friend feed the 800 pheasants kept in fields at the 130-acre farm. Theobald ran a shooting range, and the birds had to be fed twice a day. Jiggins was a bricklayer, and the frost was too severe to work that day. They skipped tea, and Theobald started up the Land Rover, scraping thick ice from its windows. It had begun snowing about 4 p.m. the previous day, and continued into the early hours when frost had set in. They drove across the field, maybe 300 yards, and turned left into Workhouse Lane. There, in front of a locked gate leading to an angler's carp pond and the shooting area, was a metallic blue Range Rover. Its windows, despite the ice, were clear, and the pair could see 2 men in the front seats. They looked asleep, and Jiggins jumped out to ask them to move aside. Theobald was wondering if they were poachers, when Jiggins, who had tapped on the driver's window, shouted out, "There are 2 dead men here." He used his mobile phone to alert the police, while Theobald went to check. As well as the 2 in the front, he saw another man dead in the back, slumped across the seat. He looked more closely at the driver, still with his hands on the steering wheel, and, he later learned, his foot on the brake. There was a round 2-inch entry wound behind his ear, exiting out of his mouth. Familiar with firearms, Theobald was astonished to learn that the men had been slain by shotgun, and that each had 2 wounds to the head. There was some blood seeping from the Range Rover, but nothing like the mess he would have expected. His favoured murder mystery scenario was to posit a killer in the back seat, shooting the men in the front from 6 inches with the rifle pointing down. But that left his fellow players wondering what his backseat companion was doing as the shots were fired. Maybe he thought he was in on the hit, or perhaps he was too drugged to react. Rolfe, a father of a 7-year-old daughter, was the first to die, police believe. A small-time hood, he was the driver, and the automatic gear shift was still switched to drive. The ignition was off, but said Dibley he looked as if he had pulled up at a set of traffic lights. Alongside him was his boss Tucker, minder to ex-WBC super middleweight champion Nigel Benn. He ran a lucrative security agency for clubs around Essex and East London, and pocketed maybe £1,500 a week. Like the others, he had a fine lifestyle, living in a £250,000 home and driving fancy cars. He was like scores in Essex in the drugs business, a wholesaler who never dirtied his hands. He was big in Basildon, but hardly serious enough to merit such special treatment. His bouncer business gave him the outlets, and Rolfe, who had a cocaine problem, was a trusted gopher, no more. Tate, who had a 2-year-old son, was out of prison for no more than 6 weeks when he died. He had a much more serious criminal record than the others, including convictions for drug offences and armed robbery. He had once escaped from the courthouse at Billericay, making off on a motorcycle driven by an accomplice. Heading for Spain, he made the mistake of visiting Gibraltar and was extradited back. He was out of prison on parole and enjoying a shave when the gunman came. He threw a brick through the window and, as Tate reacted, fired once. It hit Tate in the arm and he was taken to hospital. Staff discovered his secret stash of drugs and his handgun beneath his pillow. Tate's licence was revoked and he was returned to prison. Tucker, a friend from childhood, looked after his second-hand car business. One man questioned over that attack was Stephen Ellis. He raced off to a new identity in the West Country in apparent fear of reprisal and took to wearing body armour. He popped up a few days after the triple murder with a suspiciously graphic account of how they died. The trio had been given a choice: death by a single shot or through hacking, bit by bit. Tucker and Tate had messed their trousers. Great tale, little of it true. When Tate had come out of prison, Tucker wanted to give him a place in his drugs organisation, more of a franchise operation than an independent outfit. but as even his mother admits, Tate was a liability. Tucker and Rolfe were hardly adverse to beating up those who crossed them, but Tate, a violent man driven crazy by drugs, was out of control. The night before he died, he telephoned the London pizza company at Basildon. He told Roger Ryle, 21, the manager, he wanted a specially made pizza with 4 different toppings on each quarter. Ryle was busy and he was annoyed at the caller's attitude. He hung up. Tate was there within minutes. He picked up the till, smashed it against a wall, he punched Ryle, then smashed his head into a glass plate on the sink. Ryle, like others crossed by the trio, declined to press charges. After the murders, the rumours flew. One suggestion was they were trying to muscle in on someone else's patch. Another had them heavily in debt. And a third indicated they had been double-crossed after hiring a £20,000 hitman to take out a rival drugs dealer. There was one claim that it was a revenge attack for Leah Bett's death, with Tucker probably the ultimate dealer. And another which made Dibley chuckle, quote, "There are members of the public who even think the police did it. Bollocks. None of the dead men's families is talking. They have a good idea." But they are afraid. Dibley, with a team of 15 detectives, says, quote, "The public aren't too happy either about so much time being spent on such lowlife. But my job isn't to moralise. The killers have to be caught. There is to be no tit for tat yet, and that has surprised me a little. But some intelligence indicates the families are keen to give us a chance to sort it out." He has 5 more weeks to solve the case. There is no concrete evidence to say whether the killer travelled in the 7-year-old Range Rover bought by Rolfe 2 weeks earlier or appeared at the scene. Nor is it certain whether he had an accomplice or a getaway car, nor whether he was a professional hitman. But Dibley has a best guess scenario. He knows the 3 men were planning to go for a meal that night with girlfriends to a Basildon restaurant. Kick-off was to be 8 p.m. A telephone call came in the late afternoon. Both Tucker and Tate were still holding their mobile phones when they died. But Dibley believes the call came in from a public telephone the trio used to circumvent itemised bills. It was someone they trusted, summoning them to a meeting. They didn't think they would be long. He has no idea why Workhouse Lane was the meeting place or whether it was familiar to them. Although quiet, it was far from deserted. But there is a pond nearby, and often drug smugglers hid stashes underwater. None was armed when discovered, not even Tate, who went almost everywhere with a gun. Dibley believes it unlikely guns were taken from them, so they trusted whoever was behind the killings. The gunman didn't pick up the 8 spent cartridges. It was dark and would have taken too long. He fired off 3 shots quickly, killing Rolfe, then Tucker. They would have known nothing. Tate might have reacted and the first shot to hit him was probably the one through his abdomen. The gunman reloaded twice. Each was hit twice in the head, although probably already dead. Tate took an extra shot. Quote, "The fact that he reloaded twice when his victims were already dead means it was done in an act of vengeance," says Dibley. The motive was Tate. Increasingly out of control, Tucker had tried to give him a place in his drugs hierarchy. That, allied to Tate's behaviour, had infuriated others. Tucker and Rolfe, according to this version, were taken out incidentally, but police in Essex will shortly reopen their investigation into the death of Kevin Whittaker, 28, who died of an apparent overdose in November 1994. He was a drug courier, an associate of Rolfe. His parents and Tate's mother believe he was murdered over a drug debt. His killers, Tucker and Rolfe. Tate's mother, Marie, said her son told her about it when she visited him in hospital after he was shot. Whittaker, whose parents were horrified to discover his link with drugs, disappeared from their home on November the 17th, 1994. He had brought round his 6-month-old son Lewis, but had gone out when Rolfe called him for the umpteenth time. Almost 30 hours later, police arrived on the Basildon doorstep of Bert and Joan Whittaker to tell them their son had been found, dumped by the roadside. That Whittaker had died from a drug overdose, there was no doubt. Police, seeing needle marks on his right arm, assumed at first he was an addict. They believed his death might be suicide, and other drug users had moved his body, terrified the police might prosecute them for drugs offences. There was an inquest at Chelmsford a year ago. Rolfe called to give evidence, at first denied knowing Whittaker, then admitted he had called him when confronted with itemised phone bills. Quote, "We realised there was more to our son's death," said Joan Whittaker, 64, and then Mrs. Tate, after the deaths, claimed Tucker and Rolfe had injected Whittaker in the groin with a paralysing drug often used on horses known as Special K. The victim is powerless but conscious. Whittaker was then injected with lignocaine and died. Mrs. Tate thinks Whittaker's friends avenged his death. Her son was the innocent party. But Whittaker was small fry, and although police now believe Rolfe and Tucker murdered him, they feel it had nothing to do with last December's events at Workhouse Lane. Dibley, who remains strangely bullish, has made one arrest. A 27-year-old decorator from South London was held in a joint operation with Scotland Yard and was charged with firearms offences. He is remanded in custody, and he said, quote, "We're not frustrated. You only get frustrated when there's no work to do, and there's plenty to be done. I'm happy with how our inquiry is proceeding, and I'm hopeful of a rest before I retire. It's how I'd want to end a 32-year career."